So Donald Trump has just signed an executive order declaring foreign drug cartels as terrorist organizations, right? So what this is going to do is put pressure on those nations where the cartels dwell, because they'll be seen as harboring terrorist organizations, right? So they could be declared enemies of the state, in this case, America, right? I believe Ireland should follow this same sort of thinking, right? Because you have tons and tons of not just heroin but other drugs. If you remember the Nathan O'Donnell case, the guy who owned the garden centre, right? Politically affiliated too. Plenty of pictures with him and different members of predominantly Fine Gael party members, right? Pictures of him with them. Does that mean anything other than him just being in a picture with them? Not really, right? But he was able to bring in 30,500,000 kilos of crystal meth, right? And we've known that there are foreign gangs who are not just bringing in drugs into Ireland, but also bringing in people and robbing them of their passports and forcing them into effectively slave status, right? And that's the criminal side of it, right? Then the social side of it, and I suppose the human side of it, is that Ireland has been through generational wars, right? And those things have an effect on people, right? Misery and suffering and the consequences of experiencing hostile, tough lives, right? Relentless fear of one's own existence and one's future. That doesn't just stop when somebody's buried, right? That trickles on down through their children and their children's children, and all the way up, a continuous stream of dominoes, right? And when you have generational suffering, when you have any kind of suffering, right, drugs help alleviate that. And people who don't suffer daily, and I mean suffer, I don't just mean get a little bit anxious because you have to go to a party or do a lecture or something, right? I mean suffer, like where you don't like yourself. The idea of waking up feels like a loss, right? Where you're filled with anger solely because you've woken up another day. That kind of suffering, where you are your own worst nightmare and your own worst enemy on a daily basis. That kind of suffering. People that don't experience that or haven't experienced that will never understand the use that drugs have for people. Drugs enable people who have those kinds of burdens to continue on another day, right? And to not opt out. And many people do, right? They serve the same purpose, and this is before people get on their bandwagons of saying, oh, well, sure, why don't they just get over it and deal with it and move on, right? As if that hasn't crossed people's minds before. I would suggest this to people. Drugs serve the same purpose for those who suffer. And look, obviously you have party goers and people that just want to do it because others are doing it, grand, right? But many don't, right? And then the question is there. But drugs serve the same purpose for people as sleeping tablets do, as anti-anxiety medication do, as antidepressants do for people, as alcohol does for people, as cigarettes does for people, as going on thousands and thousands of Tinder dates does for people, as pornography does for people, right? All of these things. As shopping does for people. All of these tendencies and addictions and leaning on the scaffolds that people develop and build up around them in order to allow them to stand and move another day. That's the purpose that drugs serve for people. The only difference is that they drastically reduce your life expectancy, right? And it's not even in terms of impact. It's in terms of the degree of impact, right? Because all of those things inhibit your life expectancy and your life enjoyment, right? The feeling of self-fulfillment in your life. All of those things handicap that. But drugs tend to take more years quickly, more rapidly than those other things I've named, right? And they destroy lives individually, and they destroy families, right? And they destroy nations too. Drugs ruin almost any sort of social cohesion you have in a society, right? So a good start of that would be addressing the source of it. And I think that's what Donald Trump is doing here. And I think we could learn very, very well from doing the same thing or a similar thing, right? Because drug addicts are not your enemy, right? There's many drug addicts who probably engage in as little or less crime than your average person, right? There are people that are miserable and suffering. And then you have people that obviously profit off of that, right? We won't put all categories or all people into the same category here, right? Because people's instances or people's life situations are different, right? The morality is different. You can have drug dealers who are the kindest of souls, or sorry, drug addicts who are the kindest of souls. And you can have doctors who are the worst of animals, right? So the morality isn't decided based on one's habits or addictions. They might correlate with it significantly, right? But they're not a deciding factor in it. So don't allow yourself to fall into that thinking that those who are suffering the effects of addiction are morally inferior to those who are allowing those drugs to be imported here, right? So there's a difference. And if we have any chance of healing ourselves as a nation and ourselves individually, because it is in individual healing that our nation heals, right? Because each person that is not trying to eradicate themselves, who is not engaged in patterns of behavior that are destroying their family and themselves, each person that steps out of that is a web of influence and a web of social connection that is now healed, right? And that trickles on out through, that ripples out through society at large, right? So each individual person that gets well and feels better about their life, that is a win for everyone collectively too. If that is indeed what you want in life, is a better Ireland, a better nation, and a better future and better prospects for your people, right? So you can't, I suppose this is the point of it, you can't get up in your soapbox and declare that you want what's best for Ireland and you want what's best for you and your people if you're willing to spurn and cast aside the very people who are your people, who just happen to be suffering the most, right? So we should be throwing our arms around people, not openly blanket welcoming everybody in, right? But going, look, what can we do to help? And I think from the top down, if you were to look at implementing something similar, then that would help. So countries that are involved in the mass transportation of massive quantities of drugs into Ireland, your people are not coming in here. You will receive no charitable donations or anything from Ireland. You will receive no trade with Ireland. You will get no help. You will get no well wishes from Ireland until you clean up your side of it, right? Because what we do, perhaps now less than ever, but what we do is noticed in the world, regardless of how small we are, right? And we can make changes that are positive for ourselves and all of ourselves, right? And criminals and whatever, however loosely you wanted to term that word, right? Because your modern day criminal tends to just be someone who's standing in the face of evil in a lot of instances, right? But those who are actively engaged in destroying lives and are showing no willingness to change their ways, they should be treated with the most extreme of punishments that our laws demand. And if our laws aren't there, or if our laws previously held are after been done away with, then we would do well to bring back such laws.